Rory Stewart is in no doubt about, or leaves us in no doubt about what he thinks of Boris Johnson, but he's also he's also strangely informed about Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, um, he thinks he says whatever you think of him, he's a major figure who represents a very significant part of Labour history and heritage, and he's not a great fan of Corbyn's defenestration, political defenestration. He calls it mad and disgusting, and and of course he was deeply opposed by Boris Johnson for collaborating with the opposition against the government's Brexit policy in 2019. I think Rory Stewart is a very noble man. I remember meeting him at the 2019 elections and being quite impressed by him. And he says that I think Jeremy Corbyn has beautiful ears. George Osborne, in contrast, has creepy long fingers. But he talks overall about the depressing nature of being in Parliament, and that this isn't a sensible operation, and that serious conversation doesn't really happen any longer in Parliament, and that seems to be fairly obvious. What happens in Parliament, in my observation, is a lot of thumping on the dispatch box and reciting slogans. That's not conversation, that's not debate. That's sort of odd rabble rousing. And he talks about a peculiarly sick centre in Parliament. It's like a disease, a canker, and he thinks that because the centre is sick, there really isn't an alternative but to decentralise. I'm inclined to agree with him. And he also talks. He also talked today about the nature of prison reform, which again I agree with him entirely, because he was a prisons minister. He was the prisons minister. And he thinks that short sentences should be abandoned, and yet at the same time, Sir Keir Starmer is only too keen to encourage that sort of thing when he becomes Prime Minister. He says there's too many people in prison. Absolutely. When you've got prison cells built in the 19th century for 500 prisoners, now you've got 1,500 a year going to prison. You've got 12,000 people in Pentonville. It is madness. 2 people, 3 people in a cell built for one. And this isn't a recipe for reform. This is a recipe for discontent. It's a very unhappy place, as Stephen Fry would say. It's a place of shabbiness where shabbiness is encouraged. And I don't think it does anybody any good. I think we have to rethink what we're doing. If we don't have the facilities to keep prisoners, and if we are nevertheless at the same time paying so much for each person incarcerated, this makes no sense at all. When we pay money, we should be getting a service. That service should be that the person comes out the other end reformed. Actually, what we're seeing is a person comes out the other end and he's worse or she's worse. And there has to be a change. So I think we'll come back to Rory Stewart again tomorrow with his book under our arm, I hope, and try and analyse that in a little bit more detail.